Oh man, here they come again.
Here they come again. This still has skin on the skull. It's this classic question that I pondered years ago when I first started looking at the stuff. And many people ask me, like, it's funny because I'm sure you deal with this too, where you're talking with people, say in your everyday life, and they ask you a question, and you're like, do you understand how much energy I have to take just to back up to work you up to where I'm at right now to make this all make sense for you? And you get that a lot at church and stuff. And it's the classic question: if aliens were to exist, what does that do about God?
Nothing. It doesn't affect the gospel of Christ at all. It does no violence to the gospel of Christ whatsoever. And in fact, we already know that because angels exist. And the existence of angels does no violence to the gospel of Christ. It does not alter it. And angels are by definition extraterrestrial beings. They pre-exist mankind, clearly pre-exist mankind. Their provenance, their origin is not planet Earth. They are therefore extraterrestrial. And their existence has for centuries not altered the gospel of Christ. So why should the existence of some other extraterrestrial species alter the gospel of Christ? See, if Christ is in the center, if it's his story, if he is the purpose of the universe, then there could be all kinds of things going on in the universe that have nothing to do with us, because it's not about us. What pertains to us is the gospel of Christ, that he became one of us to redeem us. He became a man to redeem mankind. That is unique. Even the angels marveled at that. And the gospel is, the writers of the New Testament are explicit that Christ did not give aid to the angels. In other words, he did not die for the angels. He did not come to redeem the angels, but to redeem mankind. And so, that's the gospel of Christ, and that doesn't change. And people will argue. I've even seen intellectuals at the Vatican arguing that, well, if extraterrestrials exist, then obviously Christ would have had to gone and die for them as well. Why? He did not die for the angels, so why should we expect him to die for the aliens or for other factions? It doesn't make any sense. So the argument is to some extent moot. We already know that humanity is unique in this relationship to the Son of God, that he became one of us, that he took upon himself the sin of mankind and nailed it to the cross. That only pertains exclusively to the offspring of Adam, exclusively. We are the prodigal son. And so Christ leads us back into the family of God, and back not just as a servant, but back into sonship in the Father's house. That's part of the mystery and the magnificence of the gospel of Christ that most people have never really encountered. This idea that mankind was created to be a sibling in the royal family. That was where we were supposed to be. See, that's the tragedy of the fall. The tragedy of the fall of Adam is the fact that we were sundered from the family of God, sundered from our original purpose, because the primary purpose of mankind was fellowship with the Father in the family of God. That was the primary purpose. Secondarily, we were created to govern the earth. That's our twofold purpose: fellowship in the family of God and to be vice regents of this realm, a realm in the midst of other realms. So, and we have siblings in this family. That's who the angels are, clearly who the angels are in the scriptures. And of course, we have, just like among human beings, we have those of us who desire to be reconciled to the Father, right? Because that's what the gospel of Christ is. See, we are redeemed. And by the way, the word redemption means to be bought back, to be purchased, to be bought back. Who are we being bought back from? Who are we being redeemed from? Well, the parable of the prodigal son tells us who we're being redeemed from. The swineherd. The prodigal son became indentured to the swineherd. The swineherd is an archetype of Satan. And so because of sin, we were condemned with the enemies of God. Our lot was with the enemies of God because of sin, because of Adam's sin. We're condemned with the swineherd, so we had to be purchased back. That's redemption. But that's not the end of the gospel. We're redeemed so that we might be reconciled. And reconciliation means to be brought back into friendship, because the Bible says, the New Testament teaches us that we are at enmity with God. Why? Because we're condemned with the enemies of God. So we're born into the human condition. The human condition is sin and death. It's enmity with God. But the grace of God, the free gift of God offered through the sacrifice of his son, is reconciliation. It's having the sin forgiven, being reconciled, brought back into friendship and fellowship in the family of God. So we're redeemed so that we might be reconciled, and reconciliation happens through the cross of Christ and as well as redemption. So we're redeemed so that we might be reconciled, so that we might be restored to everything that was lost in Adam. Everything that was lost in Adam is regained in the second Adam, in Jesus Christ. And that happens at the resurrection, by the way, which I believe and contend very strongly is what being born again means. Being born again is the resurrection. So this is, by the way, how I teach my children the gospel of Christ. There are three words that if you understand these three words, you can understand the gospel: redemption, reconciliation, and restoration. It's not about not going to hell or going to heaven. That is a very destitute understanding of the gospel. It's about redemption, reconciliation, and restoration. We're going to be restored as full-fledged sons back into the family of God. When all of this comes to a completion and we are resurrected, we will enter back into the family of God as full-fledged sons, not just as servants. Remember the story of the prodigal son, that he reasoned as he was rolling around in the mire and eating the slop of pigs because he became indentured to the swineherd. He reasoned that even the servants in his father's house are living better than him, even the lowly servants. And so he concocted this plan. I'm going to go back to my father and I'm going to tell him, Father, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. I blew that. I'm not going to ask to be brought back in as a son. That's done. I blew my inheritance. I'm not worthy to be your son. But please take me back as a servant, as a lowly servant. That was his plan. And so, of course, he makes his way back to his father's house. And what's so amazing about the story of the prodigal son is, what is the posture of the father? Is it this mean, angry God who the atheists like to say that God is this mean, angry figure in the Bible who's just full of vengeance and wants to smite everyone? No, Jesus shows us the posture of the Father towards mankind. He's not standing there to smite you. The prodigal son is going home, and he's expecting his father to be exceedingly wroth with him, to be angry and to reject him. But instead, he finds his father waiting for him, waiting anxiously for him at the door, looking out, waiting for that son, that prodigal son, to return home. And when he sees the prodigal son approaching, he runs out to meet him, and he embraces him and kisses his neck. And the prodigal son says, Father, he tells him his spiel that he's prepared. Father, I've blown my inheritance. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Please take me back as a servant. And what does the father say? He orders his servants, quick, go. Bring new robes, bring sandals. clothe him in new clothing, because sandals, by the way, represent sonship, because servants in that day and age usually went barefoot. That was a mark of a slave. And he's saying, shod his feet with sandals and put new robes on him. And those new robes represent the righteousness of Christ and the resurrection. And they put a ring on his finger, which is the seal of the Father's house, the royal seal of the Father's house. And he brings his son back into the house, into his house, as a son, not as a servant, as a son. And it's the restoration. Everything that was lost, everything that he had squandered and forfeited, was restored to him. And it's not about going to heaven or evading hell. It's about returning to the original purpose of mankind, going back into the Father's house. And I can think of nothing that is more exhilarating, more exciting than the notion that those of us who remain in Christ, who believe in the gospel of Christ, will be ultimately restored to everything that was lost in Adam. All of our genome will be restored to the original blueprint. All of the genetic degeneracy that's been accumulated, the mutational load that's been accumulated over thousands of years, hundreds of generations, will be rectified. And all of those, what I believe, all of those original, innate, incredible capabilities inherent in the human species will be restored. And we will go back into the family. That is the gospel of Christ. That was the mission of Christ. He told his disciples on the eve of his crucifixion that in my Father's house are many rooms. He's evoking the parable of the prodigal son on the eve of his crucifixion. In my Father's house are many rooms, and I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, then I will come back to you to get you and bring you so that you may be where I am. That's returning the lost sons, the lost sheep back into the fold, back into the family of God. So that is the gospel of Christ that I'm referring to, that I believe that story has been lost and has been minimized and has been, to some extent, diminished in the Western church. And I think that it is the defense against what's coming, against transhumanism, and it prepares you to be able to accommodate the revelations that are coming in regard to extraterrestrial life into your paradigm without losing your faith. And so that's why I'm so passionate about it, and I think that it's absolutely imperative that people understand the gospel of Christ.